I'm Rabbi Leanna Morit, and I am the rabbi of Temple Beth-El in Jersey City. I know many, not everybody, from Temple Beth-El, so I really just want to roll out the red carpet and the magic carpet. Um, so please, I hope all of you feel like you can come and pop in and be with us at any time. Our doors are open, especially if you're vaccinated. That's a whole other story. Anyway, so welcome. And I love doing this because Beth comes up with the most interesting questions and then she says, well, we can have this conversation about it. And marvelous idea. And then the, the conversation along, which is so much better than I feel like one person kind of prattling on. Um, so, you know, So welcome. I'm really happy to see you. Beth, are you starting with your question?
Yeah, I was going to warm everyone up by first a show of hands of do you believe that there are other energies among us that we can't see? Two hands, a lot of hands. Excellent.
Great.
I'm wondering if personally, and if anyone wants to share a story, you're welcome to unmute yourself. If you've ever felt a presence of either maybe someone that you know personally that passed away, or maybe you've been in a place and felt like there was something else there. Does anyone have a specific story or moment they'd like to share? Go
I
ahead,
don't,
Carol.
yeah, I don't really have a story, but there have been many times that it felt like someone was in the room with me. They might, I felt like a wind sort of would just walk behind me and I turn around, it's nothing there. So I'm not sure what that is. So when you ask, do I believe that there are some sort of, not entity, but energy, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's the wind, all the windows are closed, so it's not wind.
Oh,
But
sure.
there's something that definitely passes me, and I don't know what it is. That's about it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Judy?
This is a little strange, but um, not so much a person, but I've had my cats visit me, or out of the corner of my eye, or hop on the bed. And
I
other,
also have thought I've seen one of my cats that had passed away kind of walk by, just like in a peripheral way. I think for an instant, I see them walking by. Yeah.
yeah.
Rabbi, you go to synagogue all the time, and that place is forever old. Do you ever feel anything in there?
So even before, spending time in Temple Beth-El, I've had these sort of usually in the form of birds, and I understand that that's actually really quite common. That that you sense the spirit of somebody is sort of there in the presence of a bird, and that feeling's been very strong a number of times. But yeah, I have to say that very I mean, I spend a lot of time in the temple alone, and I'm the only one there. And I really do sense the presence of the souls that have spent a lot of time in the synagogue, and they love it there. And they're a little they're kind of like, what's going on now? And it's almost like, all right, who are you? And are you keeping our spirit? And then, I'll do something and I'll make a change. Like when we changed the pews around a couple of years ago, it took a little while for them to go, okay, all right, we were a little, um, because there's this sense of history, but I definitely get this sense that there's this imbuing of communal history and the spirits of people that they're there, that that this is a good place for them, and that they hang there.
That's
That's-
nice. I see the cat put in the chat that she had something.
Oh, I was agreeing with Judy
Oh,
about the cats.
the cats.
I've
Okay.
had that. But also my dad calls me on my phone all the time. My dad is passed, but often my phone will show his name on my phone. So I know that he makes himself known all the time, but that's one of the ways that he does it. Actually literally calls.
Thank you for sharing. Well, Robin, go ahead.
The first Yom Kippur Yisker service after my dad had died, I was in the service, and then there was this, it was almost like colored particles of light by me. And I felt that was him. And every year I try to recreate it, but it never happens again. But I know it was definitely him. But it was like this yellowish light that was maybe I don't remember the exact color, but it was definitely a colored light of like particles around me. So
Wow.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, right? We have these feelings, maybe some of us, and they happen, and we feel the presence of somebody who we miss so terribly, and we would love to be able to kind of conjure them up and talk to them and, feel their presence. And, they just, whether we feel them or not, if they're going to come, they're going to come when they're going to come. And I'll speak for myself. I can't do anything to make them happen. And that is sort of part and parcel of where the Jewish tradition kind of falls into this mystical experience. When it's instructive, I think, to think about how spirits and angels and supernatural beings, how they function in Jewish literature and folklore and our mystical imagination, and how people might understand subtle forces of the universe that we can't explain, right? Some of us have just described subtle forces that we can't explain, that we attribute, we just know it. This, how we know it, we don't know, but we know. In the tradition, in our tradition, we understand that not everybody feels them. Really, only the most sensitive can sense them. Even fewer can access them, if you will, kind of like when we want, and even fewer than that can, if any, really can affect or approach manipulating them, like getting them to do something. But we do have, over the centuries, these stories and ideas of when that's happened or how that might be able to happen, and but more stories about these feelings, again, of these subtle forces in the universe, that are part of a cadre of forces, which, by the way, in Jewish literature also includes sexuality, reproduction, and differentiation, and the bringing forth of life, right? Our mystics consider these things, these great cosmic mysteries and awesome powers that are bestowed upon, I mean, it's certainly the procreation and the sexuality on all human beings, but the more subtle things only on some human beings. And that there is a pattern in the universe. We know from some more like traditional Jewish teachings that a person's deeds create entire worlds and order the cosmic array, but that this is an imitation of how sort of God creates worlds, and through our words that we can sense and order things. Anyway, I have more, but I know that you asked a question or go somewhere with this.
Well, that was a lot more open than I was going to jump, because in our actual in the Bible, right? It's God didn't want us to consult ghosts and
Yeah,
things.
thank you, Beth. Of course, everything in Jewish, starts with Torah, right? And the deeper and the more you peel back the layers in Torah, you see that the Torah assumes these things exist. They assume sort of spirits and angels and supernatural beings exist and are sort of part of the natural order of things. They don't go into detail, I think, really, because I mean, one, there's not a dictionary or an encyclopedia of how these things work, but in Torah, um, uh, they're just part of the world, and so it's not a book about explanations. It just presumes it.
But
Later on,
in that, sorry to cut you off, in that they say don't do it, they're kind of acknowledging it.
exactly, yeah. And I actually brought the text. I'm not sure I can bring it up. Yeah, it says, the Torah says, let no one be found among you who consigns his son or daughter to the fire. That's like, don't child sacrifice, which again, if people weren't doing it, the Torah wouldn't say, don't sacrifice your children. So it's a somewhat of a new mitzvah. But then it goes on in the same breath. Don't consult someone who is a soothsayer, a diviner, a sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or one who consults ghosts or familiar spirits, or one who inquires of the dead. Well, if they weren't going on and people weren't just completely sure that these things were part of the cosmos around us, then we wouldn't need a rule to say not to do these things. And so magic, if you will, of this sort was and still is like a major no-no. And that the Torah is saying, look, there are correct ways to relate to God and to the spiritual world: prayer, sacrifice, and intuition, if you will. And then there are incorrect ways, magical ways, or ways that try to manipulate or call upon a divine power, or call upon the supposed power of other gods, or, if you will, sort of order your thinking such that these spirits are on par with or in conflict with the divine, while at the same time just sort of presuming that they're all there.
It's just like in our own lives, we have laws that say don't do this, right? But I don't want to go there. I want to bring up an actual specific story in the Bible about the witch of Endor, because I think it's a good example of this. So
It is.
there was a law that said you couldn't.
Right. You're not supposed to inquire of the dead. You're not supposed to go to a soothsayer. But here we are. It's in the book of Samuel, where our very first king, right, King Saul, he's really not doing well. He's at war, and he goes and he consults this witch of Endor, and she is somebody that consults other realms and consults other worlds, and she brings forth the spirit of the prophet Samuel and Nathan. I'm pretty sure it's the prophet Samuel. And Samuel gives Saul some really bad news, basically that he's going to die the next day, he's going to lose, and King David is there. And in fact, the Torah says that that's what happens. And so again, it's like, if you take a step back from the story, right? First you see the story, right? And as a modern, we go, well, that's a weird story. But when you look at it, you're like, well, okay, here, there's this rule, don't do it. But here, the king of Israel is actually doing it. So this is something that is probably a hard custom to kick, because it's so widespread. That's there. And in fact, she brings forth the spirit of this dead prophet who foretells what happens, and it happens. So this is the witch of Endor. And we might say, "Oh, what's happening here?" But this is an example of what it means to sort of peel back the onion and go, oh, well, this is just presuming that these things exist, and that they need to be boundaried.
Well, because also, oh, Sam, did you want to say something?
You're muted, Sam. We can't hear you.
It just seems so hypocritical for the top rabbis or whoever wrote the Torah to say, don't listen to some of these people who aren't the official head people, because then you have a prophet like the guy, I was there, his name Samuel. What's the difference between prophets and soothsayers? You have people telling, Lot's wife shouldn't turn around, or, well, all these stories in the Bible, they're, prophecies. They're people who see into the future. So it almost seems like the Salem witch trials, like to control things. And these days, a lot of, I don't know if it's still against the Jewish tradition to go to like look at your zodiac calendar or get your fortune told or whatever that people might do. But so I'm wondering, is that, or even, let me just lastly say the Hasidic laws, to me, the extreme things that ultra religious people do, like you can't turn on the light on the Sabbath, like that seems so, from myths or suspicions, that came from, to me, that's nonsense. All these, strict laws that the ultra Orthodox follow. So anyway, go ahead.
I want to peel back a couple of things, because you sort of brought up three different things, and they actually, in the Jewish tradition, they have nothing. They're separate. But in the mind of a modern, I can see where it's easy to conflate them. So we understand as Jews that the age of prophecy ended with the close of the Bible. So that they just don't exist anymore. So this idea that you can listen to somebody and they are like a prophet from the Jewish religion, that era closed very long time ago. And what I mentioned before, is that you talked about, like, getting your fortune told, or sort of reading your horoscope, and this is where the degree to which you pattern your life matters Jewishly, right? If you're patterning your life on your horoscope as opposed to a mitzvah that you should be doing, that's where you're going to be crossing the line sort of Jewishly. If it's something that's sort of curious and it gets you to be a little bit self-reflective, or it's a little bit fun, or you go, what, it gets me thinking about something in a different way, that's one thing, right? It's another thing when you're putting all of your stock, if you will, all of your faith into the person that's reading your tea leaves, or the person that's reading your palm, or the person that's reading your horoscope. So that's where we can do that, which is completely different from not turning on the lights on Shabbat. So not turning on the lights on Shabbat has nothing to do with spirits or mystical or superstition. That is directly comes from the rules of Shabbat that you would follow if you're traditional. It says you don't light a fire on Shabbat, right? And using electricity is lighting a fire. And so this is why you wouldn't use lights. You wouldn't be switching on and off your light switches. You would set your lights to the ones that you want on, like your bathroom light or maybe your kitchen light, and you would just leave that on for the full 25 hours. That's just a Jewish practice thing. It doesn't have anything to do with the spiritual realm, if you will. Not tonight's spiritual realm anyway.
I think we also need to say, because the stuff we're going to get into now, we're going to get into a little bit of demons and stuff. You have to remember, right, that the time that the Bible was written, that these stories were made, the Israelites and the people in the lands were previously had many gods that they
Yeah.
they prayed to, and they made little idols, and so there were all these different little deities, that people still thought of. The one God was a new
That was radical.
kind of concept. So when we get into like these little bit of demons and stuff, it might sound weird, but they were actually, some of these were little deities that people prayed to.
Certainly that's the precursor to them, right? We have the word, the name for God, that's Elohim. And if you know a little Hebrew, you know that that's a plural word. So just the first name of God that we have in the Torah is a collective in that way. But you're right, that's absolutely radical for its time, right? People used to believe if you were in, if you were in Canaan, then you were subject to the Canaanite god of the land. And if you moved over to Assyria, well, then you were subject to the Assyrian god of the land. And if you were in Egypt, right, this idea that there was one God overarching that followed, that was all over, that was pervasive, and no matter where you went, you were in relationship and in covenant to that God. That was absolutely radical for its time. That being said, even within the realm of Torah, which is sort of where we started, there are all of these places in which we're not really sure if the beings that people are encountering are people. Are they divine beings? Are they acting, are they looking like people? Are they in the role of a divine being, at least temporarily? Are they always in the role of divine being? And there's some there are some of our most important formulative stories that that indicate this. And I want to just start with the word for angel itself. So the word for angel itself in Torah, in Hebrew, it still is a malach. And a malach is a messenger. And so we have a number of stories in which somebody, a being, is it human? Is it divine? Is it divine just for that moment? Is it always divine? It's not clear. But there's a message, there's a very important message that this messenger is delivering. But it could very easily be a person. And it's not, and there's a beautiful vagueness to it that I think from a spiritual level, I always take it as, how many times in our own lives has somebody said something to us at the exact time that we needed to hear it, that maybe if somebody else had said it, or it was said at another time, we absolutely either would have written it off or we wouldn't have heard it in the same way. And that, that there's something that's like that ding, and it probes deep. And I often think that those messages are delivered by angels, right? Those are malachim. The person that said it, it might be Joe from the coffee shop, who's always Joe from the coffee shop, or whoever, our husband, our wife, whatever. And they're still them, but in that moment, they were acting as divine messengers, maybe, right? We don't know. It's there's this delicious ambiguity that comes, I think, just by the Hebrew of calling an angel a messenger.
Since we're talking angels, I want to, as I tell people this story frequently, I had, back when I first started showing photographs, I had quite a few images of angels because I've always, anything with wings kind of interests me. But I had these images from statues I took in New Orleans and even from a couple of cemeteries. And I remember this friend of ours saying, I like your photos, but, I'm Jewish, so I'm not really into the angels. And I've always that's always stuck in my head. So what do you think? I mean, in my mind, I think I also thought angels, Christianity. But what do you think the difference is between how Jews view angels and Christianity views angels?
Well, I always start by saying, I don't know. I'm not an expert on what Christianity does. Right. So we can have a conversation with a Christian leader. So I can only talk about I can only talk about how Jews understand angels. So moving from, well, first of all, they don't all have wings, right? So we just talked about, like, sometimes they act downright and they maybe are downright people. Are you talking about angels or are you talking about spirits in general?
Well, I was talking about angels
Okay.
specifically.
Yeah. So
I mean, I read that some of them are actually invisible.
sure.
There was that one angel with Balaam who was invisible till God let him see him.
Oh, you're talking about the donkey?
Yes.
Right. That's this week's Torah portion, actually.
Anyway, so
I would say that in the Jewish mystical imagination, most angels are invisible. They are kind of, they're forces, they're subtle forces in the universe. And they have their realm and they have their domain, and they have a certain their, you know, we so they exert force in certain situation, and maybe we invoke their presence when we are trying to invoke what it is that um, that they that they channel. So I'll just be really specific. Every night, a traditional Jew says the bedtime Shema. It's a prayer. And this isn't part of the nighttime service. This is just before you go to sleep. You say the Shema. Really, you say the Shema at this moment because the tradition teaches that you're supposed to say the Shema the last thing on your lips before you die. And because there's a vulnerability that the tradition understands that's inherent in sleep, it's actually, it says, the tradition says that sleep is 1/60th of death, right? We're sort of letting go of consciousness. We're letting go of the day, right? We're really allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. So the tradition says, say the Shema, that, you know, that you will be sort of protected into whatever it is that you're sliding into when you're asleep. But what part of the nighttime Shema includes is invoking the four archangels. And the prayer, it says it's actually beautiful. It's been turned into a lullaby by one of our rabbis, and many people sing it to their children as a like a bedtime thing. You say the Shema and then you sing this lullaby. But what you're doing is you're invoking Michael. You've heard of the name Michael. Well, Michael is the name of an angel. Michael. It's God's sort of right hand man, if you will, who is like you, somebody that's sort of when God's got important stuff to do. God sends Michael. So you're invoking Michael on your right, Gavriel, who is on our left, Gabriel, right? That's again Hebrew, Gabriela. I know we have Gabriela here, right? So Gibor is oh, we have Rafaela. Sorry, that's the next one. Gabriel is the angel of strength. And then behind us is Raphael, who is the angel of healing. Rafaela, we have Rafaela here. That's what I was meaning, right? That who we're invoking, that we should be healed through the night. And then before us, we have Uriel, who is the angel of light, so that we should have light to guide our way. And then above us all, we have Shechinat El, which is the overall presence of God, which is stays with us through the night. So this idea of invoking those powers, those elements to stay with us through the night, that's something that's very, very traditional, actually.
and that comes from, doesn't that come from a blessing that was it Jacob or Isaac that gave to the grandsons?
Yeah, Jacob.
Oh, that was it's part, it's earlier in the Shema that it's an angel. May the angel who has redeemed me from harm bless these boys. May they carry on my name and thus the name of my ancestors, Abraham and
Yeah.
Isaac. May
So
they spread far and wide upon the earth.
So I think what you're referring to is at the very end of Genesis, when Jacob is blessing his sons and his grandsons. and he's referring to this angel, this malach. It's not clear, but my guess is that the angel that he's referring to there is the angel that well, two things. One, Jacob's a little bit of a shady character. Sometimes things are a little bit opportunistic, and sometimes they feel like they're really quite heartfelt. So you're never really sure. That's why his name is Jacob. It comes from Yaakov. It comes from a heel. He's bent. As a character, he's not a straight up guy. So, earlier on in Genesis, he basically says, okay, God, you say you're with me. If you stay with me and you kind of prove, you'll be my God. It's a bit of a quid pro quo with him. So that's sort of the first time that Jacob, by the way, he's invoking this God when he's running after stealing his brother's birthright, but that's a whole nother trip. Later on in the Jacob narrative, again, where he's doing something that's a little bit shady. He's kind of splitting up his family into like favorites stand back, so in case they get attacked last, and the ones that aren't so important, the least favorite wives and children, they go first, sort of the front line. Anyway, so when and of course Jacob goes last because he's protecting himself. But just at this point in the middle of the night, it says at first it says this man, this Ish, comes to wrestle with him, but then later on in the story, just a couple of sentences later, it says that Jacob has his hip dislocated and his name changed to Israel because he has fought with angels and prevailed. So is it a man? Is it an angel? It even, in peeling all of it, is it his conscience? So it's not really clear, again, in this wonderfully delicious, ambiguous kind of way, how do these forces, these angelic beings, function in our lives or in a human's life as well as in the biblical narrative, which is why, we started this off like, how do we sense these things in our life and when?
Do you think that more of the instances in the Bible where angels involved with somebody, that it's when they're dreaming or they're not sure?
Probably. There's a passage also in Genesis when Abraham is recovering from his circumcision. He circumcises himself as an adult. And it says that, again, is it an angel or is it a man? But three beings, they come to him and he greets them, but they foretell Sarah's becoming pregnant and giving birth to Isaac, even though they're both really quite old. And it happens in that way. So so there's one that's not quite a dream. Jacob also has a dream of angels coming up and going down. And then there are angels that sort of move the narrative along. There's this one kind of obscure character. He gets a line. Joseph, he's kind of wandering around. He's by himself, and he goes to this guy and says, "Hey, have you seen my brother?" And this man, this Ish, says, "Oh yeah, they've gone down to Dotan to shear sheep." We don't hear from this Ish again, but it's Joseph's going to Dotan, finding his brothers. His brothers throw him in a pit and sell him as a slave down to Egypt. He goes down to Egypt, becomes number one to Pharaoh during the famine. His brothers have to come to him, but they don't recognize him because he's number one next to Pharaoh, and sells him. He gives them grain, brings the family back to Egypt, so they're saved from the famine. The family moves to Egypt. 400 years later, the family's enslaved in Egypt. All of the all of the whole family is living in Egypt. We've been slaves for 400 years. Moses has to come and take us out of Egypt, take us through the Sea of Reeds and to Mount Sinai. But if it wasn't for this one Ish, this one guy, this one angel, the entire narrative of Torah that is the Jewish story doesn't happen. And you think about that in our own lives. It's like, if not for this one stupid little thing that you wouldn't even think, my entire life would be different. The world would be entirely different.
Wow. So you think messenger?
Yeah.
Do you think that when God was creating the world, when did the angels come along?
Oh, this is wonderful. This is wonderful. Thank you for asking. And I know I asked you to ask me this. So in quite a bit of our midrash, these angels, or if you will, these forces, were part of what existed even before the creation of the world. They are, if you will, part of the spiritual building blocks of the reality map of the cosmos. They're the reality map of the universe. And we might think of like angels as like winged beings, but that's just not how they work in Judaism. Although there are some descriptions of some angels that are colorful and even scary and descriptive. Many of them don't have a visual form as much as they'll have like a cognitive form. And there's this one midrash that anybody here? Yeah. So a couple of people here have been in my introduction to Judaism class, and one is about to be in my introduction to Judaism class. So if you are in it or have in it, you've seen me teach this text before, but it's such a great text. You can learn it any number of times. So there is, if you'll indulge me, I'm gonna bring it up on the screen if that's okay. The text, and it's a midrash. For those of you that aren't familiar with the word midrash, midrash is kind of what colors in the blanks of Torah, right? Torah has any number of places where you'll read a line and you'll go, what? Wait, there's something in there, and the Torah just keeps going on, but we stop with questions, right? So this line, and so a midrash comes to answer the question that we as a reader, any reader for that matter, will ask. So this is a midrash on a line in Genesis. Can everybody see where I am? You see this? This is a midrash on this line in Genesis. Maybe you've heard it, right? It's at the beginning of creation, and God gets this idea to create humanity. And in Torah, it says, and God said, let us make human in our image, after our likeness. And I ask you, when you read that line, if you were reading Torah and you saw that line, and God said, let us make humanity in our image after our likeness, is there a question that you might ask?
Who's the us?
Who's us? Wasabi. Who is this our likeness in our image? Who's God talking to? And what is this whole image thing about? How are we created in God's image and after our likeness? It's repeated, right? Does that question come out from that line? Yes, a nod if it does, right? So what you need to know is that there's a whole lot of people that have asked that question over the years, and a whole lot of Jewish thinkers that have come up with stories that attempt to answer that question. And what you need to know about midrash is that you can have 10 different possible answers to the same question. They can completely contradict one another. You don't have to believe any of them, and you can like one or buy into one day and then completely change the next day. And there's absolutely nothing hypocritical about that. That's called being Jewish, and that's called being thinking, and that's called wondering and studying and being a God wrestler, really. And that's what Israel means. So a little bit with that. So so what I'm going to bring back here now is one midrash that attempts to answer this question, like, who's this we at this beginning of the creation of the world? Okay, so here we are. So Beth, actually, can you read it for us? And I'm going to interrupt you every couple of lines, so don't take it personally. It's just how I teach text.
When Hashem, God, said, "Let us make humanity," God was addressing the angels to solicit their opinion in the matter.
Okay, stop right there. Beth, do you find anything interesting about this? Or curious? Anybody find anything?
Yeah, where did they come from?
Yeah, where did they come from? Yeah, that's one thing. So unmute. Anything else? Anybody else finding anything interesting in that? Just that one line?
These three opinions.
Yeah, right. Is it?
Or
You
she.
actually think about God when God's creating the world, that this is like a community. It is a committee meeting where we're finding consensus. So God is soliciting opinions. So not only is God not alone, God has this angelic retinue around, and God's soliciting opinions. Like God is trying to get some kind of consensus. We don't know. Why is God? I don't know. Maybe God just likes to hear God self-talk and is soliciting opinions because God is going to listen. We don't know, right? But also interestingly, whatever the image is that we're going to be created in that is godlike is also seems to be angelic like. Got that too, right? So it's our image, our likeness. So it's God's image and these angels' image, right? So already a lot in there, right? It's not answering as many questions with this story as it is bringing up lots of curious ideas. Please continue, Beth.
The angels were split up into different factions. Some of them were in favor of the creation of humanity, while others were opposed.
Right, factions. Oh, interesting. Who would have imagined that in the angelic retinue that there are factions, right? So so what's this story going on about? This is sort of talking about like kind of what's embedded in the fabric of the universe, in the reality map of the cosmos, right? So this idea that sort of that there are factions, or there are differentiations, or there are differences, right? And some are for, some are against. So it's not all, not all in the same. Cool. Continue.
Rabbi, I have a question. Angels, how did angels even come about? Did God create these angels, or were these angels created? How were they created? How did they even exist that God could even have these conversations with these angels?
Were they part of heaven when God created heaven and earth?
Well, according to this midrash, they're part of the heavenly retinue. Sort of again, Carol, there's no like, sort of Encyclopedia Judaica on angels and the creation where it says Jews believe this. We have lots of different ideas about these things, but it's not dogma. This isn't something that says, oh, you're supposed to believe in this. Everybody believes in this. So there's not one answer. I mean, I could say, well, according to Lurianic Kabbalah, before the creation of the world, there was only God. God filled the entire universe, and the entire universe was God. And God had to make God's self smaller. God had to contract. The Hebrew word is tzimtzum. God had to make God's self smaller to make room for something in the universe that wasn't God. And in that little contraction, God poured this little spark of divinity into that empty space. And according to Lurianic Kabbalah, in that injection of that divine spark into that empty space, that amazingly is in the literature becomes an event that sounds very much like the Big Bang. It's an explosion of matter that, we read in the Genesis of the first 6 days, and I like to say some days feel longer than others. This happens to be a particularly long day. I don't know about you guys. And part of that creation process are the heavens and the earth. So maybe in that creation process of the heavens and the earth, that those particles, those energies became angelic energy, angelic being. I mean, that's my weaving together different philosophical treatises that I can't say that I've ever seen written in one particular place, but they all come from, Jewish philosophy and Jewish legends. So I'll answer it that way.
Can I add something to
Sure.
this? I know we're talking about the life and God and the Torah and stuff, but from my understanding with this area of the topic that we have here, like with the Odyssey, didn't they say that it was the people who invented the Greek gods to, spice life up a bit, and because life is boring, and I think that the aspect of writers and artists and storytelling, it has such a major role in this discussion, but isn't that who was the Yiddish writer? Is it Sholem Lechem or something like that?
Very well-known Yiddish author, Shalom Aleichem.
So, like who? I mean, I think that the reason I'm bringing this up is because it may not. I think a lot of the stories that involve the demons and the Dybbuk or whatever are not, they are not grounded in, in Torah necessarily. They just, so many people who hear these stories and stuff. I mean, really, are they even observant and in touch with,
Yeah, thank you. So, there's a whole retinue of demons and Dybbuks and evil spirits and good spirits that show up in the literature over the course of 1,500 years, even more. Some are quite ancient and some are much more modern. The vast majority of them are coming out of literature of very learned and observant people. Look, it's pre-modern, certainly, but this is, I wouldn't say this, you can't say that this is out of the realm of a community of scholars and people who don't take their Judaism and their Jewish philosophy and their Jewish practice very seriously. You want to?
On that note, I'm going to thank Sharon, because we're going to segue a little.
Yeah.
We're going to segue because we're in Genesis, and Sharon brought up some good points. So let's talk about Lilith.
Yeah. Listen, I want to just close out this. If you read ahead, what you see is that there are any number of angels. One is the angel of kindness. The other one is truth. The other one is peace. The other one is Torah. So even Torah existing as an angel in the primordial soup of forces before humanity is, they all pipe in, some vote for, some against. And God makes the decision, obviously, to create humanity. But I bring this in because it shows that these ideas of angels functioning in the process of things, of how we understand things like truth and Torah as part of the primordial soup of the reality map is very deep into our philosophy. You were asking, Beth? Say it
So
again.
we're in Genesis and we're in creation, and a lot of people think that Eve was the first woman, but there's plenty of thought that someone named Lilith was actually
Right.
part of the first creation of humanity.
So show of hands if you've ever heard of Lilith. So a couple of people. So if I was going to say to you, tell me the story of the creation of humanity, man, woman, what would you say? Somebody unmute yourself and tell it, it's, you can say it in 2 sentences. This isn't a long diatribe.
Who wants to do it?
Come on, you know the story.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Well, but this is what I was taught. I'm not sure if it's what is in the Torah, but so there was Adam and Eve, right?
And first.
First came Adam.
And how does Eve come?
From his rib.
There you go. That's the story, right?
Yes.
Adam comes first. Adam goes to sleep. Somehow a rib or a side, miraculously Eve pops out. And then there's the whole story about the apple or the snake and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Now, what you need to know is that in the book of Genesis, where this all comes from, right, there are 2 stories of the creation of humanity. That story that we all know, right? The reason that we know it, I don't want to burst anybody's bubble, right, is because you need that story to justify man's dominance over woman, right? Because man has to come first. Woman is a little bit clueless because she's kind of catching up. God talks to Adam, the don't eat this, do that, right? You need that story to forward that narrative, which, okay, it's got its place. It has a totally different place in Judaism as it does in Christianity. But that's not the first story of the creation of humanity. And so that line that I read you before where it says, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, right? The very next sentence is the first story of the creation of humanity, and it reads like this. And God created human in his image. In the image of God, he created this human. Male and female, he created them. I'm going to read it again because I'm going to be very specific about the pronouns here. Yes, okay, I'm not going to get into a whole thing about calling God him. What I'm really looking at is the pronouns that are being used about this creature that is being created. And it says, and God created, I want to just, and God created this earthling in his image. In the image of God, he created this thing. Male and female, he created them. The very first time that the Bible talks about the creation of humanity, it is very clear that there is male and female at the same time, and there's a them. But it's this earthling. So it's really kind of deliciously ambiguous. I mean, just in terms of the conversation that we can have about, any human being and how much of us is masculine and how much is feminine, and are we all really kind of hermaphrodite and have elements of male and female. That's a great conversation for another night. But from in the Jewish mindset, it poses an important question. How do you reconcile this particular story of the creation of humanity with the second story of creation of humanity? The second story is what? You got Adam. Adam goes to sleep, pop, out comes Eve. That's where you get woman, right? So the second story has man coming first, then woman, but the first story has them coming both together. And how do you reconcile? And who's this second woman if there was already one that was created to begin with. This is where Midrash comes in. So the Midrash posits this, that this first creature was both male and female. Some kind of say that they're kind of back to back, that they don't face each other. Again, there's lots of different Midrash on it, but it's this one creature with male and female. And when they split and the female gets wind of the fact that she's got to be subservient to the male, she flees. So she is sort of in the Midrashic literature understood as, like, if you will, Adam, the earthling's first wife, who does not want to play by the rules, does not want to be subservient to the man. And in the Midrashic literature, she takes on the identity of Lilith. She is given the name Lilith. So Lilith in the Midrashic literature is Adam's, if you will, first wife. Now, given that this is the ancient Mideast, right? She does not get a very good reputation. She, because she does not want to be in this relationship and flees, she is then given the identity of a demon, of a baby killer, of someone that comes and harms children, perhaps in the night, and a whole slew of stories and legends grow out of this Lilith character. And
Fake news.
Yeah, you're right. The Lilith character is there to answer the question, well, who is this first half human that's the female half before Eve?
Very nice. All right, we're going to stay in the demon section.
Into demons, yeah.
And we're going to bring up Mazakim, who, from some of the stuff I was reading, was possibly created at the same time. What I read was created on the eve of the Sabbath of creation. And it's just a general term, right, for demons.
Yeah. It's an early, these are Mazikim that you were talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's sort of a general. So this is where I want to get into this idea of what is the role of, sort of demon in the spiritual life of a medieval Jew, or people that are writing about these things. And what I'd like to suggest is that, well, yeah, okay, so I'll just sort of say, yeah, Mazikim is sort of better translated as sort of a generic harmful being, right? And a demon, right? So definition, right? A definition of a mazikim or a demon would be an energy, a physical force, even a psychological state that a person would have or be in or experience in the world, that are then given symbolic or metaphoric identities. Sort of like, do we ever use the term, we're plagued by demons? We're fighting our own demons, right? I think that that's probably a good way of understanding how they kind of take on identities in Jewish mythology, right? Anything that can cause decay or pain or the depletion of life energy, or maybe even sort of self-doubt, right? They become anthropomorphized, if you will, in the form of a demon. They're around, right? And sometimes they glom onto us. And sometimes we fight with these demons, right? And we have no problem saying, oh, I've got this little demon, or I got this little thing on my shoulder, right? And this is, I think, the function that they play in the mystical literature in Judaism. But they grow with these fantastic stories and they have lives of their own. They have identities of their own. And some of them, yeah, I mean, but I think that's how they function, right? They sort of function that we can relate to them. And sometimes I think sometimes if we see them for what they are, right? Sometimes things that like get bigger than they need to be, right? They're easier to fight these demons.
Right. And I also wanted to talk about the Dybbuk, which is like a demon, but it's a demon that normally is associated with possessing someone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
whether we think that that's actually the case, you know, one of the things is that, you know, back in the day, that people that before modern medicine, people that were probably mentally ill, right, were considered to have a Dybbuk, like possessed.
Sometimes.
Right? Because they didn't know any better. So could that sort of be an instance with the Dybbuk and the Mazikeen?
Yeah, so I would think that a Dybbuk is probably a form of a mazik, is part of the retinue of Mazikeen. Yeah. And right, so a Dybbuk you're going to find is in like they first show up in about the 16th century. So, you know, relatively modern Jewish history as far as things go. And, you know, and this sort of comes into, well, I mean, I sort of feel the Iborim, they're the good spirits that I feel in the sanctuary, if you will. And right, the Dybbuk's were thought to be the souls of dead people who temporarily would possess the living in order to accomplish certain tasks. Interesting, like the word dveikut, it's a Dybbuk. Dybbuk comes from being stuck or glommed onto or glue, right? If you're gluing something in modern Hebrew, you're using a form of this word of a Dybbuk, right? That's so it's something you can't quite shake, right? It's glommed onto you. But it's interesting, this whole idea of something having a hold on you to accomplish a certain task, right? Because there's another strand in the mystical literature that talks about how each time a soul is born, right, when we are dispatched into the world, there is something that we're meant to accomplish, each and every one of us, right? And when we have done that, and we might never even know what that is, we probably don't. We don't know when and if we've accomplished it, but when we've accomplished it, our mission in life has been completed, right? Sort of like the rest is gravy, right? So I think it's an interesting thing about this whole Dybbuk thing, which sort of I think kind of sort of piggybacks onto this idea that this soul attaches onto another soul to accomplish something. Was it something? Did something happen to that soul that it expired before it was able to complete that mitzvah, before it was able to complete that task, that it had to come down and somehow get expressed in another person's body, in another person's in their life, in their dispatch on this world? I wonder about that. And then of course, you know, in this literature, it says that ideally, when this is accomplished, it returns to its source. But then sometimes things go wrong, and a variety of ills may befall the soul. Yeah.
That doesn't sound fun.
No, and that's the thing with all of this, you know, when you and getting back to the whole thing about the Torah, it says these things exist, but it's not for us to try to manipulate them, right? It's like sort of trust in the way that the world works, because it's playing with serious fire.
But would an exorcism wouldn't that be messing with it?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting when you bring up exorcism, because I don't know enough about exorcisms to speak about them with any kind of authority. I do know that there are people, very few. I trust two people, not to do them, but to refer to somebody that I think has both the wisdom, medical knowledge, psychiatric knowledge, spiritual knowledge to be able to discern whether a particular case actually might be worthwhile to consider as that, but it's out of my realm. But there are such things as Jewish exorcisms.
Do they teach you about that in rabbinical school?
They do not. That is a that would be a sub specialty.
Sub.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the Dybbuk, which is supposed to be sort of a little bit of a demonic possession, but then you sort of briefly mentioned the Ibur, which is supposed to be a good spirit that.
And I always find it really interesting to kind of, like they is an Ibur. So like, what's the etymology of these words, right? So Ibur, which is like, if you will, it's like, a good spirit, has embedded in the word of being impregnated or an incubation, which I just find so fascinating, because to me, what that has in it is potential, right? That's got growth embedded in it. And Iburim, if you will, they come up at really in dreamlike states with some pretty well-known rabbinic characters. So for example, has anybody heard of the Rabbi Yosef Karo? So Yosef Karo is one of the, bright lights in Jewish history and in Jewish literature and in Jewish intellectual. Joseph Karo is both the author of the Shulchan Aruch, which is the most authoritative book of Jewish law that the Orthodox, conservative, anybody that studies Jewish law, they base everything on the Shulchan Aruch, and Joseph Karo is the co-author of the Shulchan Aruch. So, in the realm of legal minds, and this isn't spirituality, when you're reading the Shulchan Aruch, you're reading like law code, right? This is straight up, okay? Some people might eyes glaze over, some people, that's how they spend their life. But Yosef Karo reported that in his dreams at night, he was constantly visited by an Ibur. And this Ibur would, I don't know, however way you get images, ideas in his dreams, sleeps, that became also one of the most widely read, followed, wondered, studied book of Jewish mysticism. So by day, he was a legalist. By night, he was a mystic. And he credits all of his mystical writings and his mystical insights to this Ibur that would visit him in the night.
I did read that the host actually has to give permission to be possessed by the Ibur, and that the Ibur actually helps the host accomplish something that they need to accomplish, right?
Yeah. Or yes, that's one of those things, right? To
rather than the Dybbuk, which is kind of a demon who's self-serving, they take a host to accomplish something that the demon needs to finish.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
Right.
Like the Dybbuk is for the sake of the Dybbuk soul, and for the Ibur, it's more of a partnership, and that it's something that needs to be birthed right into this world. Yeah.
That's a good way of saying that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, because, well, I can speak for Kat and I. We're both like, fond of fairies and the thoughts of fairies and little things flitting around with wings and, very earthly and friendly to the earth. Do Does Judaism have anything like that that you can think of?
Fairies?
I don't know that it would be called fairy specific. Now, I did read that in the Song of Songs that there's a mention of fawn-like spirits, harmless, and they called them shadim.
Mm.
Does that do anything for you?
Song of Songs is wonderful. So no, I mean, honestly, I mean, what I want,
I'm reaching in search of fairies.
what I also would be helpful is like, well, you know what? I see Rabbi Mullins is here. Can you say anything about Shadim? I mean, I'm thinking of, Shaddai, whether there's, that's why I always always want to look at the etymology. I always want to look at the Hebrew. Because that in and of itself is a really interesting word, but I don't know the Shadim in the Song of Songs. I can't tell you much about them.
We're
Sorry.
putting Rabbi Brown on the spot. Maybe she walked away.
Maybe.
She says, I'm out of here. But the one thing that I had read, that they do consider Shadim demons, but that they're only demons because they're foreign gods, not because they're bad. So in the age of God having to be the one God, anything that sort of falls onto one of these other communities having these other small gods, they would consider them shadim.
Could be.
So they could be some little like goat-like little something that's fairy-like, but they're not gods, so they're shadim. Here, I'm interpreting things.
So when you get into the realm of foreign gods, and we're getting into the realm of idolatry, and then we're getting into the realm of they're foreign gods because people are worshiping them mistakenly, and mistaking whatever these things are for, if you will, like competitive powers to the ultimate power. So
Reaching, it's a far reach.
yeah.
So on the thought of goat,
Of
shadim, should we talk Azazel?
yeah, Azazel. It's
Azazel, thank you.
yeah. So Azazel comes right out of Torah. Actually, Azazel is Yom Kippur. And the Reform movement has, in its wisdom, excised a number of very standard Jewish texts out of some kind of important places, and this is one of them. The Yom Kippur morning reading in like basically every synagogue except for those, and it's actually in the back of our book, but they don't put it in the front of the book. Whatever, it's a whole nother thing. The Yom Kippur morning reading is the story, is the recounting of the Yom Kippur ritual when in the temple, and of what should be when the Jews were wandering the desert and in the temple. And raise your hand if you've heard of the scapegoat. You heard of a scapegoat? You know where the scapegoat comes from? What's a scapegoat? Somebody.
Judy?
I think I know. I think that it's to use a goat, to tether a goat to, if people are trying to keep themselves safe, they tether a goat because the goat will then be the victim. That's what I've heard.
So yeah, really close, right? In modern parlance, right? If you kind of put the blame on some innocent poor schmuck, right? And he's going to take the heat, and that's the scapegoat. That's making somebody a scapegoat, right? This comes from Torah. The the ritual described in Torah that we read on Yom Kippur morning has Aaron, or the high priest, gathering all of the Israelites and confessing the sins, and then placing the sins, the collective communal sins of all, on the head of this goat. Right? They're actually supposed to be two identical goats. One is marked for Azazel, and this is the goat that gets all of the collective sins, sort of placed on this. The other goat goes up to God. The scapegoat gets led out of the camp and thrown off a cliff and sent to Azazel. Now, it's not really clear in Torah whether Azazel is a place, like at the bottom of the cliff, or it's this demon, Azazel, that's going to eat up all of the goat with all of the sins. In like demonology and angelology, like this mythology, it becomes this demon. Sorry, I've got hiccups from that water. That sort of consumes this goat. But it's I just love this image. I mean, because from a sort of like, if you think about like Yom Kippur, right, this day that after we've done this work of apologizing and trying to make amends, and then clearing the inner space so that we can leave Yom Kippur feeling light and cleansed and with a clean slate, ready to start again. That in this mind, right, in like our reptilian brain, right, our sort of pre-modern brain, can't you see how this phantasmagorical story can kind of work wonders if you believed, right? If you could believe that the high priest had the power of collecting all of our communal sins and placing them on this goat, right? And then sending this goat off, never to be heard from again, right? And to buy into that sort of sacred mythology of, good, it's this demon that we're never going to see or hear from again, eats the goat, right? And the other goat, who's identical, clear and clean, gets sent up to God. God's happy. We emerge from this ritual and we're cleansed. Clearly, that's not how we do Yom Kippur today, right? We do it with our deeds and with our prayers, right? And with our charity, right? And our interactions, right? But the end result has to be the same, right? If we don't buy into this notion that the spiritual work that we're doing on Yom Kippur leaves us with a clean slate to start again the day after Yom Kippur, why do we bother going through this whole motion, right? We our tools in our toolbox are different, right? But the end result, sort of how we emerge from the day is still the same. So you see sort of how that functions, right? In the ancient mind, the function of this demon is to sort of eat it all up.
Have this. We're closing in on time, and I want to get to the golem because it was in our title. So
can't leave out the golem.
Does everyone know what a golem is?
Heard it.
Does anyone not know what a golem is? You want to raise your hand?
What's
Karen?
a golem? Somebody teach the rest of us. What do you know about a golem?
Little mud person.
Oh, mud person.
It's a big mud person.
Oh, it's a big mud.
Like mattered from dust and mud and shaped, formed into this like Frankenstein character. Yeah.
So it's a big creature made from earth.
Yeah.
Would Adam be considered a golem? You have a short answer for that?
No, because it's not made by a human. It's made by God. It's made by God.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the most famous golem story.
Right.
Do you want to relay that?
Sure. There's the most famous golem story, which is, the Maharal of Prague, that that created this Frankenstein-like character in order to sort of protect the city from the anti-Semitic forces. And then the golem kind of got out of control, and the rabbi, the Maharal. Now remember what I said at the beginning, like only the, if you will, the creme de la creme de la creme, subsection of a subsection of a subsection would have the wherewithal, the spiritual power, and the acumen to do this. This is not something, that at least in Jewish mythology, right? That it's like you can just like Google make a golem. It's not like you can't do that.
They don't teach you that in rabbinic school either.
They don't. I wish. I was like, my son was like 5 years old, and I was, or 6, I don't even know, 7, 8, 9, when I was in rabbinic school. And I remember overhearing this conversation where one of them was asking the other, they teach you that in rabbinic school, they teach you that in rabbinic school. And they're arguing back and forth whether mom knows this stuff. And my oldest kind of looks up from the book and he goes, they do teach it, but it's classified. So like, but no, it's not, they don't teach you this stuff. Spells Golems 101, and then you graduate to 102. Yeah, no. Anyway. But so, this is, even if it did exist, it would be in the realm of a subsection of a subsection. But what's interesting, I think, and what's at the core, right? To me, whenever I study these things, I'm like, what is the spiritual teaching? How does this help us to understand ourselves? How does this help us to understand the sort of the forces that we're kind of navigating all the time in the cosmos, in bizarre relationships, even in the news sometimes, right? Strange relationships. So, the word golem, I love words, right? It means incomplete or unfinished, kind of like an embryo, right? So it's an embryo that is birthed right before its time goes nowhere, right? It's unfinished. It can't sustain on its own, right? The most interesting piece that go to know, I think, that goes into the golem is that a golem plays with these two words to create in Hebrew. One is to form something, and the other one is bara or bore, like bore peri hagafen. Only God can bore or bara, because that is actually creating something from nothing, like a soul. We can all kind of create, like from dust or clay, a figurine, but to imbue it with life, to imbue it with soul, to imbue it with a will, that's magic, right? And that's the magic that happens when we make babies. That's the magic. And other than making babies, it's in creativity, it's in art, right? But other than that, it's really, and we can say God has to be in that process, or it's not bore, it's not bara, right? That's sort of the definition of, like, when God gets involved, that's when something really comes from nothing, like a human being or art or an idea, right? That's something that's really special, and that God's got to be a partner in that somewhere, right? And when the Maharal of Prague could manipulate the life forces to imbue this creature with animation, that is imbuing it with some godliness. And that is what's written on this golem's forehead, one of the names of God, right? So if you go to Prague and you like buy a little golem, because they're sold on every little street corner, right? You see, well, if they get it right, it says Emet, right? And that's one of the names, one of the many names of God, Emet. It means truth, right? And once that was imbued in the golem, it was animated. But when the Maharal of Prague needed to deanimate, he removed the aleph, which in and of itself is a bit of a mystical thing. And without the aleph, it is met. It's not emet, it's just met, and met means dead. And sort of like, look, the Frankenstein comes from this, right? It is a Frankenstein, right? And then just like in Frankenstein, right, when you play with these energies and you try to manipulate these energies, sometimes things can go very, very wrong. And this is what happens with the golem. Right? Try to use the golem to save the community, but instead it run amok, and there was damage and there was pain, and so the Maharal had to, disengage, deanimate the golem, remove it, and hide him in the attic of the shul in Prague.
I read about this Yiddish Russian story called The Clay Boy. Have you heard about this, Rabbi? So it's an older couple, their kids have all gone away, and they're lonely, so they form a boy out of clay, and he comes to life, but he ends up just eating them out of house and home, and then he goes and eats the villagers, and then he actually eats them. And the clay boy is just eating everything, and a goat outwits him and ends up like ramming him with his horns, and it breaks up the clay boy, and he's gone. So it's another little golem story.
It's great. It's great. So, if there's one thing that, and I just want to, if there's one thing you take away from this, well, I mean, lots of wonderful ideas. I don't know, when you think about like what's eating you, or what's sort of, gnawing at you, or what's with you, or what's sort of hanging around that you just can't shake, and it feels like it's growing hair, or growing a personality, is that a Dybbuk? Is that a golem? What is that? But I always love to think about, how is it that we understand our, the greater forces that are around us and our place in these conversations. But Jewishly speaking, and this is really, really, really important, this is all in the realm of Jewish philosophical literature, of which there are so many different stories, most of which contradict each other, and none of which gets into real detail. None of this is mandated belief. None of this is definitely not dogma. This is not where you go, oh, I know all about Jewish belief. It's all about angels and demons. And no. It's like, whoa, that would be like so wrong. This is really, this is like extracurricular Jewish activity, fun. Music.
It's kind of like when you go on the internet and try and look up something and you find opposing things.
Yes.
And you just can't decide what it is that's truth.
Yeah, and Jewish, there's no contradiction. You can have this and you can have this, and they don't have to merge, right? But they do. They exist. Well, they don't have to merge, but what they do is they exist in the Jewish philosophical imagination, the Jewish imagination, to offer us possible explanations to the mysterious workings of the universe and put them in spiritual terms. They help us to make sense of some things that are just sometimes inexplicable, or things that we know and that we sense, right? But that don't have good vocabulary for, or good ways of working through them. And so the tradition, it gives us these identities, these beings, these tools to kind of sometimes just hold up, either you want to call it a mirror, or you want to hold up, sort of a frame to put these ideas and experiences in. So yes, they are there. And we see them and we hold them and we go, okay, that's part of us too.
Thank you for guiding us through these things. You know what? There was a lot more. There was just so much information that I had kind of looked into, and there's probably no way we could do it in an hour and a half, because part of the great thing is the discussion, and even some of the participation that we had tonight. So I want to thank everyone that came and joined us tonight. A bunch of people I know. Hello. And of course, thank you to Karen Seaman for being our go-to Zoom lady to let everyone in and made everyone behave. And especially to Rabbi Moritz for being open to these discussions. Because I throw an idea at her and she says, yeah, let's do it.
I love you, Beth. You know, it's like, because if anybody can like, you know, lead this conversation and like kind of open it up and figure out how to do it, you can. And I love doing this with you. So thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments they want to throw out there? For the rabbi or for me or just good night?
We're doing another one of these things, right?
Yes, I was going to say that. Do another one.
On the same topic?
No. Don't we have something else coming up?
We were talking about doing LGBT talk in August for Jersey City Pride. But if anyone has topic, they can send it to me. I can put my email in the chat, and you can feel free to send it my way, and I'll talk to the rabbi about it. Some of these, I feel like some of these talks, we've only done 2, but I feel like they need to be 2 or 3 parters, you know. Oh, found my keyboard.
What was the name of the book that the mystic one?
The Shulchan.
Oh, the Shulchan Aruch. Oh, that Joseph Caro.
The mystic one that
Yosef Caro, the legal treatise that he wrote was the Shulchan Aruch, and I'm not sure if there's one or there's more than one.
or maybe if you just put his name in the chat,
Yeah,
and I can Google him.
yeah. So I'm gonna do that now.
Heading out. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy, and thanks for participating.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna put that in the chat. His name. Where's the chat? Chat.
And also, since we're all there, I want to thank Robin. We've managed to have a Pride banner put up yesterday at Temple Beth-El, celebrating Pride, and she helped get that done. And we're very proud to have it there.
Yeah, looks good. And Matt Stein, you know,
Yeah.
great
Our-
design.
Our graphic design.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Robin.
Yeah.
Thank you, Larry.
And Larry, it was her idea.
Yeah.
I think she jumped off of here.
All right. Well, she gets credit.
All right, Kat, did you get the name and the text? Okay.
I know there was a diary, but I'm not sure what it was called.
Thank you.
Okay.
Actually share, there's a great link from my Jewish Learning that has like a lot of his writings and stuff listed in there. I'm gonna stick the link in the chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Because it mentions his, I was gonna try to copy it and I was like, my fingers aren't nimble enough on a laptop right now. But it does mention the diaries.
Thank you.
Fabulous. All right, I hope you all have a good night and a great Shabbat tomorrow.
You.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you both.
Thank you,
Thank
Beth.
you.
Welcome.
Rabbi.